You were taught to fear being single. Culture whispers that if you are alone, you are broken, incomplete, unloved. But Jung would say the opposite, that solitude is often the most fertile ground for transformation. This wasn't loneliness. This was a furnace. Because when no partner stands in front of you to absorb your projections, you are forced to face yourself. Jung wrote that the meeting with oneself is the first test of courage on the path to individuation. Most run from it. They escape into relationships, distractions, or endless searching. But those who remain, those who sit with the fire, find a source of energy that society can barely comprehend. Consider this paradox. When libido, the raw psychic energy that fuels desire, is not consumed in the constant dance of romance, it does not disappear. It accumulates, it condenses, it becomes potential, waiting to ignite. You may feel this already, the restless pressure, the sense that you have more to give, more to create, more to discover, but you cannot explain why. Jung would remind us that energy never disappears, it only changes form. What you once poured into attachment, you now hold in your own hands. And this is why staying single, rather than being a deficit, can become your greatest advantage. Not because it makes you immune to heartbreak, but because it grants you the rare chance to channel that untamed force inward, forging it into creativity, clarity, and power. You see, the real danger was never solitude. The real danger was wasting solitude, using it only to mourn what is missing rather than to build what has never yet existed. So let us begin at the root. If libido is more than sex, if it is life itself, then the question is not, do I have enough love, but what am I doing with my energy? Because how you answer that determines whether your singlehood becomes a collapse into emptiness or a passage into mastery. To understand why your singlehood is not a void but a source of hidden power, we must return to the moment when Carl Jung shattered with his teacher, Sigmund Freud. Freud reduced libido to one thing, sex. He believed every human conflict, every neurosis, was at root a repressed sexual urge. His map of the psyche was narrow, almost mechanical, desire seeking discharge. But Jung looked deeper. He saw something Freud could not admit. Jung argued that libido is not merely sexual fuel. It is psychic energy itself. It is the current that animates dreams, that paints visions on cave walls, that drives explorers into unknown seas. In his own words, libido is a will to life, a striving for growth, expansion, and development. The break was not academic, it was existential. If libido is only sex, then the single person is starved, deprived, incomplete. But if libido is life energy, then the single person is wealthy, sitting on an untapped reservoir that, if directed, can move mountains. Look at history. Jung's clinical cases revealed that when a patient's desire was blocked, two fates emerged. Some collapsed into despair, their energy stagnating into neurosis. Others, those who learned to redirect, suddenly painted, invented, wrote, or healed. The very absence of a lover became the presence of a fire. He noticed this not only in patients but in cultures. The monks of Tibet, the alchemists of Europe, the hermits of early Christianity, all figures who, by stepping away from ordinary pair bonding, discovered that libido could be transmuted into vision. This is why Jung immersed himself in the study of alchemy. He saw in its symbols not medieval superstition, but a secret psychology, the transformation of raw instinct into higher forms of life. And he knew this truth was dangerous because it meant you were not condemned by your relationship status. You were challenged by it. Therefore, the question becomes, what happens when we stop believing that singlehood is absence and begin to see it as containment, libido without leakage, ready to be forged? This leads us into the next step, defining libido not as an impulse toward another, but as the very current of your life itself. Pause here, because clarity matters. If we are to understand why singlehood can be a source of power, we must define our terms with precision. What exactly is libido? For Freud, It was sexual instinct, nothing more. But Jung refused to let the concept be confined to the bedroom. He saw libido as a broader, deeper force, the total reservoir of psychic energy flowing through your being. Think of it as electricity. It can light a room, or it can burn a house down. It is neither good nor evil, it simply demands direction. Jung wrote that libido is the energy that manifests itself in all the forms of life, striving for the general goals of growth and development. Notice his choice of words, all forms of life. Not just sexual pursuit, but artistic vision, intellectual hunger, spiritual yearning. You experience this when you feel restless, when you sense that you are meant for more than your current surroundings. You experience it when a single idea keeps you awake at night, vibrating in your mind like an unplayed symphony. You experience it when a sudden attraction, a flash of desire, reveals not merely hunger for another person, but hunger for intensity itself. Because libido does not vanish when you are single, it redirects. And this is where the danger lies. If you do not consciously direct it, it will unconsciously direct you. It may drive you into endless scrolling, seeking microdoses of stimulation. It may drive you into shallow relationships, mistaking proximity for intimacy. It may even turn inward destructively, creating depression, addiction, or obsession. But when harnessed, libido is the same energy that fuels genius. It is the same current that turned exile into poetry, heartbreak into invention, solitude into spiritual awakening. Therefore, we must stop asking, do I have enough love in my life? The more urgent question is, where is my energy flowing? Because energy is never neutral. It is always moving. It is either leaking away into distraction, or it is being gathered, condensed, prepared to erupt into creation. And this is why singlehood can be the rarest opportunity. It is the season in which you hold the whole reservoir yourself. No one else is siphoning it. No one else is shaping it. For perhaps the first time, you are responsible for its direction. Which leads us directly into the next question. If libido is the current of life, then why does culture condition you to waste it by equating your worth with coupledom? You did not come into this world believing that being single was shameful. That belief was taught to you. It was whispered through fairy tales, scripted into films, reinforced in every conversation where someone asked, "So, who were you seeing?" Society casts a spell, and the spell is this: your life is incomplete until you find the other half. Jung saw this spell as the collective shadow of Western culture, a projection of our refusal to face our own incompleteness. Instead of bearing the tension of solitude, we make another human carry it for us. We do not want to meet the depths of our own psyche, so we look for someone outside to hold the mirror. This is why relationships are so often filled with disappointment, not because love is false, but because it is burdened with a demand it cannot carry, the demand to save us from ourselves. And yet, the cultural machinery insists coupledom is the goal. Advertisements, songs, even religious institutions whisper the same mantra: pair up, settle down, blend your identity with another. Why? Because a distracted individual is a compliant individual, a person constantly scanning for love, validation, or companionship does not ask dangerous questions. But here is the cost. When you chase the cultural script blindly, you scatter your libido outward. You give your energy away in fragments, endless texting, constant pursuit, the anxiety of being chosen. You live in a state of leakage. Singlehood, on the other hand, threatens the system. It is a refusal to leak energy where it is not honored. It is the silent reclamation of power. When you stop obeying the cultural spell, you suddenly possess something rare, an energy economy no one else can drain. Jung would call this individuation the process of becoming whole without collapsing into dependence. It begins with breaking the enchantment of coupledom, because once the spell is broken, you can choose freely, love without compulsion, solitude without shame. So here is the paradox you must hold. Society says being single is lack. Jungian psychology reveals that it can be surplus. It is not absence. it is abundance. Not because you reject others, but because you finally see the difference between projection and presence. This understanding leads us to the next critical question. What kind of single are you? Because not every form of solitude liberates. Some trap you deeper into shadow, while others ignite your transformation. Not all solitude is the same. To say, "I am single," tells us nothing about how your libido, your psychic energy, is being used. Jung would insist we go deeper. He would ask, what shape has your solitude taken? Because depending on how you carry it, singlehood can become poison or gold. There are 3 archetypes of singlehood. Each one is a mirror of how you meet your own energy. 1. The wounded hermit. This is the one who retreats not from strength, but from fear. They withdraw because intimacy burned them, and now they confuse protection with isolation. Their libido collapses inward, curdling into self-pity or bitterness. They believe they are saving themselves, but in truth, they are starving themselves. Jung warned that what you resist persists, and the hermit resists life itself. 2. The distracted wanderer. This is the one who wears singleness like freedom, but secretly feels restless. They scatter their energy into endless distractions, casual encounters, shallow pleasures, entertainment binges. They are always moving, never still. Their libido leaks everywhere, never gathered, never transformed. Jung might say they are trapped in enantiodromia, the swing of opposites, constantly chasing novelty to avoid the stillness that terrifies them. 3. The alchemist. This is the rare figure who discovers the hidden secret. Solitude is not exile, but laboratory. They feel the fire of libido, and instead of repressing it or wasting it, they contain it. They redirect it into creation, study, art, mastery, vision. They accept the loneliness of transformation, knowing it is temporary, knowing it is necessary. The alchemist embodies Jung's teaching that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. The alchemist does not solve being single. They outgrow the illusion that it is a problem at all. And here is the great dividing line. The hermit avoids energy. The wanderer dissipates energy. The alchemist transmutes energy. Which one are you? Because until you recognize your archetype, you will keep repeating its cycle unconsciously. And if you do not choose the alchemist, your singlehood will either shrink you into the hermit or scatter you into the wanderer. Only one path leads to power, and it is the path Jung saw in the symbols of alchemy itself. This is why we must now step into that symbolic laboratory and explore how libido, contained and refined, undergoes transformation. If singlehood is not exile but laboratory, then alchemy is its operating manual. Jung devoted decades to decoding alchemical texts, not because he believed men could literally turn lead into gold, but because he saw in their symbols a mirror of psychic transformation. He realized that what the alchemists described with furnaces and flasks was the same process the soul undergoes when it contains libido and directs it inward. They called it transmutation. Jung called it individuation. The alchemical stages are 4. Each corresponds to a phase of the single person who dares to hold their energy instead of leaking it outward. Nigredo, the blackening. This is the beginning, when solitude feels like despair. You feel the weight of emptiness, the hunger for someone else to carry your burden. It is a descent into shadow, into ashes. But Jung warned that in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. Nigredo is not failure, it is the necessary decomposition of illusions. Albedo, the whitening. Here the ashes begin to clarify, needs are purified. You begin to see the difference between desire and addiction, between longing and compulsion. This is the cleansing of the psyche. Instead of begging for attention, you reclaim your gaze. You start to sense that solitude is not punishment, but a vessel. Citrinitas, the yellowing. This stage rarely gets spoken of, but Jung emphasized its importance. It is when the purified libido reveals itself as creative fire. Suddenly you feel energy flowing into art, into writing, into building, into study. The sun rises. You discover that being single gives you uninterrupted power to grow into your own form. What once felt like absence now radiates as intensity. 4. Rubedo, the reddening. The final stage, integration. Here, the single individual no longer rejects relationships, nor clings to them. They are whole, and therefore free. Love can enter, but it does not consume. Solitude can remain, but it does not diminish. The energy has been forged into permanence, the red stone, the philosopher's gold. Jung saw this as the symbol of individuation, to become yourself so fully that no external bond can enslave you. And here is the paradox that terrifies society. When you reach Rubedo, you no longer need relationships. Therefore, you are most capable of true love. When libido is no longer wasted in projection, you become magnetic. People sense the wholeness in you, the self-contained fire, and they cannot look away. Because you are not chasing them, you are radiating. This is why Jung immersed himself in alchemy. He knew it was not superstition, but psychology written in symbols, libido as fire, solitude as vessel, self as gold. So the question for you is simple. In which stage are you living? Are you still in the ashes of Nigredo, or are you nearing the fire of Citrinitas? For where you locate yourself determines the work you must do. From here, we can move to the practical lens. What does it mean to live with an energy economy of singlehood? How is libido managed or wasted in daily life? Energy is never free. Every choice you make has a cost. Jung warned that we don't get anything for nothing. Everything costs something. The same is true for relationships. They are not simply sources of companionship. They are energy economies, and most people never realize how expensive they are. When you are entangled in constant romance, your libido is not your own. It leaks into endless negotiations, the text messages at midnight, the emotional repairs after arguments, the subtle compromises of self to maintain peace. You begin to live with half your energy outside of you, siphoned into another's world. This is not inherently wrong. Relationships can be transformative when they are conscious. But when they are unconscious, they become a constant drain. You sense this in the exhaustion that comes from people-pleasing, the stagnation that follows after months of giving more than you receive, the silent erosion of your inner voice. Singlehood flips the equation. Suddenly, there are no invisible leaks, no external demands, no unconscious bargains draining your psychic current. All the libido that once scattered outward returns to its source, you. This is why so many creative breakthroughs, spiritual awakenings, and personal revolutions occur in periods of solitude. The individual is sitting on a surplus. Libido, once entangled in projection, becomes fuel for writing, for invention, for vision. Think of historical figures, mystics in monasteries who produced entire spiritual traditions, artists who painted masterpieces during their most solitary years, inventors who worked alone until their ideas reshaped the world. They were not weakened by singlehood, they were supercharged by it. Because libido is like water. Pour it into many cracks and it seeps away unnoticed. Contain it and it builds pressure until it powers a turbine. This is the hidden economy of singlehood. You suddenly own all of your energy. No siphoning, no bargaining, no leakage. The only question is, what will you do with it? Will you waste it on distractions, or will you refine it into mastery? And here is where danger reappears. For energy contained without direction can rot. It can turn toxic, curdling into repression, addiction, or obsession. Which brings us to the shadows, the psychological dangers of misused libido. Energy is neutral until it is directed, and here lies the danger. If your libido is not consciously shaped, it will unconsciously shape you. Jung saw this in countless patients. The same fire that could transform them into creators often destroyed them when misused. There are three great dangers of mishandling your energy while single. 1. Repression, the silent collapse. This occurs when you deny your desires altogether. You try to smother them under discipline, religion, or shame. But libido does not vanish. It goes underground. Jung warned that what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. Repression breeds neurosis, strange symptoms, depression, unexplained anxiety. You think you are controlling the fire, but in truth the fire is smoldering, waiting for eruption. 2. Dissipation, the endless leak. Here, energy is scattered in fragments. You avoid loneliness with endless dating apps, casual encounters, or compulsive entertainment. You are constantly stimulated, but never transformed. It feels like freedom, but it is slavery to distraction. The libido never accumulates enough to fuel true creation. It leaks away in countless small acts. The person wakes up years later, exhausted, with nothing to show but memories of stimulation. 3. Inflation, the ego's delusion. This is the most seductive danger. When all your energy is contained within you, the ego may inflate. You begin to feel superior, untouchable, above others. Jung saw this often in spiritual seekers who mistook psychic energy for divine superiority. Inflation isolates you not as the alchemist, but as the false prophet lost in your own image. And the fall, when it comes, is brutal. Because energy is power, and power without humility becomes destruction. These three dangers, repression, dissipation, inflation, are the shadows of solitude. They are the ways singlehood turns against you if you lack awareness. And yet, Jung insisted that every danger is also a doorway. Because if you can recognize these patterns, you can redirect them. If you can hold the fire without smothering it, scattering it, or worshiping it, then you stand at the threshold of true transformation. This is why containment is the next essential step, not repression, not indulgence. Containment, the art of holding your energy in a vessel strong enough to refine it. The dangers of repression, dissipation, and inflation reveal one truth. You cannot eliminate libido, you can only direct it. Jung compared it to a river. Dam it completely, and it floods. Let it scatter, and it evaporates. Worship it, and you drown. The secret is containment. Containment is not denial. It is not indulgence. It is the discipline of holding energy until it can be transmuted. This requires a process, one Jung hinted at through the symbols of alchemy, and which we can frame in 3 phases. Phase 1, containment, stop the leaks. The first step is to notice where your energy is currently bleeding away. Every compulsive scroll, every meaningless flirtation, every late-night surrender to instant gratification, these are leaks in your psychic economy. You cannot alchemize energy you no longer hold. Audit your daily habits. Identify the hidden leaks, sexual, emotional, digital. Cut them not with shame, but with clarity. This energy is too valuable to waste here. Jung would say that individuation begins with facing the shadow. Containment means confronting your habits without self-deception. Phase 2, concentration, gather the force. Once the leaks are closed, pressure builds. You will feel restless. This is the moment most people relapse, because the fire feels unbearable. But this is precisely the stage of transformation. Create rituals to anchor the energy, journaling, meditation, breathwork, disciplined exercise. Focus it into small tasks that demand attention, study, craft, skill practice. Remember, libido must have form. Concentration means giving it a vessel so it does not explode. Jung reminded us that energy cannot be freed without sacrifice. Concentration is the sacrifice of comfort for direction. Phase 3, transmutation, redirect into creation. When energy has been contained and concentrated, it seeks a higher outlet. This is where the single individual discovers the true gift of solitude. Libido, once wasted in pursuit of others, is redirected into art, philosophy, entrepreneurship, spiritual practice. What once burned as longing now radiates as mastery. Here you discover what the alchemists symbolized as the gold of transformation, the self forged through fire. And the paradox is complete. By not chasing love, you become radiant. By not scattering energy, you become magnetic. By not repressing desire, you learn to reshape it. Containment, concentration, transmutation. This cycle is not theoretical. It is the map that turns singlehood into sovereignty. The question is whether you can endure the discipline long enough to see the fire change color. Because many start the process, but few persist. Those who do, however, often become the figures who shift culture itself. Which brings us to examples. Real people who carried this process differently, some who collapsed, others who ascended. Jung believed that psychology is best seen not only in clinics, but in the lives of those who carried its forces to extremes. To see the truth of libido, we must look at those who stood at its crossroads, some who were consumed by the fire, and some who transmuted it into radiance. The cautionary example, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a man aflame with vision. He lived much of his life alone, his libido unbound from romance or family. In that solitude, he wrote words that shook the very foundations of Western thought. God is dead. Become who you are. His libido became philosophy, poetry, prophecy. But Nietzsche lacked the vessel of containment. His solitude was closer to isolation. He swung between feverish productivity and crushing illness. Without balance, his libido burned him out. In the end, his fire consumed him, his final years marked by madness. Jung studied Nietzsche carefully. He admired his genius, but warned that unintegrated energy leads to psychic collapse. This is the shadow of the alchemist who forgets humility, a brilliance that blinds even itself. The exemplary figure, Leonardo da Vinci. In contrast, Leonardo stands as the archetype of successful transmutation. A man who never married, never tethered his libido to the conventional scripts of family life, yet radiated vitality across every field he touched. Painting, engineering, anatomy, invention. His solitude became a laboratory of endless creation. Leonardo exemplified containment and redirection. His libido, rather than collapsing into repression or scattering into dissipation, fueled mastery. He embodied Jung's principle that the libido is the creative impulse of life itself. Where Nietzsche burned, Leonardo forged. Where Nietzsche collapsed into shadow, Leonardo carried the flame without being destroyed by it. The lesson. From these two figures, we see the double edge of singlehood. Solitude can be a cauldron of genius or a chamber of madness. The difference lies in whether libido is given form. Without form, it devours. With form, it creates. And you are not so different. Your solitude may not produce world-shaking philosophies or timeless art, but the principle is the same. The energy you hold now, if transmuted, can become the foundation of a new life. The question is whether you will let solitude devour you like Nietzsche or forge you like Leonardo. And this brings us to the most intimate part of the journey, confronting the shadows that rise when you are alone and integrating them rather than running from them. No one steps into solitude without meeting a shadow. When the noise of relationships fades, when distractions fall away, the silence begins to speak. And what it says can be terrifying. The single individual hears whispers, "I am unlovable. I will be alone forever. Something must be wrong with me." These are not facts. They are projections, forgotten wounds, unhealed memories, unmet needs, surfacing in the vacuum of solitude. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you do not confront these whispers, they become your truth. You will run back into relationships not out of love, but out of terror, terrified to face yourself. Shadow integration is the refusal to run. It is the courage to hold these thoughts, to examine them, and to ask, where do they come from? Perhaps from childhood, when affection had to be earned. Perhaps from betrayal, when intimacy equaled pain. perhaps from culture itself teaching that singlehood is shame. When you face these shadows, you dissolve their power. You realize that being single does not mean you are unworthy. It means you are being forced to carry the weight of your own projections until you can withdraw them from others. And this is the paradox. Only by embracing solitude can you become capable of real intimacy. Because once you integrate the shadow, you no longer need another person to confirm your worth. You already hold it. Jung saw this as individuation, the process of becoming whole by making peace with your unconscious. In solitude, the shadow rises not to destroy you, but to be reconciled. And when you reconcile it, you emerge lighter, freer, and ready to love without chains. Which brings us to practice. How do you sustain this transformation? How do you hold your energy and keep integrating your shadow day after day without slipping back into old leaks? Transformation is not a one-time event. It is a discipline. Jung often reminded us that the psyche resists permanence. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The moment you relax, the shadow creeps back, the leaks reopen, the energy dissipates. This is why you need maintenance practices, rituals that keep the vessel strong, so your libido continues to be refined rather than wasted. 5 practices stand above the rest. 1. Ritual solitude. Do not let your aloneness be accidental. Make it deliberate. Schedule time where you withdraw from noise, not to collapse into despair, but to listen inwardly. This is solitude as medicine. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Ritual solitude is the space where awakening takes root. 2. Creative channeling. Your energy must have form. Write, paint, compose, build, design, code. Choose a medium where libido can leave a trace. The form does not matter. The act does. Creation stabilizes energy, turning inner pressure into outer manifestation. Without this outlet, the psyche festers. 3. Body mastery. Your body is the furnace of libido. Neglect it, and the fire smokes. Train it, and the fire burns clean. Practice exercise, breathwork, or disciplines of movement. Sexual energy, in particular, requires conscious management, whether through celibacy, conscious expression, or sublimation. Jung saw the body not as separate from the psyche, but as its instrument. 4. Relational calibration. Being single does not mean living in isolation. You must weave connections that feed, not drain. Friendships, mentors, creative collaborators, these relationships are different from romantic entanglement. They balance your energy without siphoning it. They remind you that individuation is not narcissism. It is selfhood in service to the whole. 5. Spiritual attunement. Energy without direction easily becomes arrogance. You need practices that align you with something greater, whether meditation, prayer, dream journaling, or symbolic work with myths and archetypes. Jung taught that symbols are the language of the unconscious. Engage them, and you remain tethered to meaning rather than lost in inflation. Together, these 5 practices form a rhythm: solitude to reflect, creation to release, body to ground, community to balance, spirit to orient. Without them, your energy will scatter. With them, it becomes a steady current. And when enough individuals practice this containment, the change is not only personal, it ripples outward into culture itself. Because how we handle libido individually shapes the destiny of society collectively. Your singlehood is not just about you, it is also about culture. Because how you carry your libido does not end with your body, it radiates outward, shaping the collective. Jung warned that the greatest danger to mankind is the psyche of man. When individuals waste their energy in compulsive coupling, culture itself weakens. Dependency becomes the norm. People settle for comfort instead of creation. They demand validation instead of vision. The collective unconscious fills with the hunger of unfinished selves. Look at our age: endless dating markets, industries built on distraction, entertainment designed to numb the pain of being alone. This is not love, it is economy. Billions are spent to keep you leaking your libido outward so you never accumulate enough energy to become dangerous. to become truly yourself. But history shows a different pattern. Cultures that honored individuation, monastic orders, Renaissance ateliers, mystic schools, produced breakthroughs in art, science, and spirit. When individuals dared to contain libido, civilizations advanced. When they collapsed into compulsive pairing, societies stagnated. This is why your choice matters. You think you are only deciding whether to be content in solitude. In truth, you are either feeding the cycle of dependency or seeding the culture of renewal. Because if enough individuals refuse to scatter their energy, the collective changes. Innovation rises. Spiritual life deepens. Communities form not from fear of being alone, but from the overflow of individuated selves. So do not underestimate your solitude. It is not a private matter. It is a cultural stance. You are either an echo of the collective spell or a signal of the coming shift. And this brings us back, full circle, to the paradox we began with. For what you feared as emptiness was in fact abundance. What you called loneliness was always potential. We began with a fear, the fear that singlehood is emptiness, exile, deficiency. You were taught to believe that if you are alone, you are less. But now you see the reversal. The danger was never being single. The danger was wasting singlehood, squandering the furnace of energy it grants you. This wasn't loneliness, this was a forge. Jung taught that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot become who you are if your energy is endlessly leaking outward, chasing what culture tells you to chase. Only when solitude forces you to face yourself do you touch the raw current of libido that can make you whole. So reframe your solitude. It is not a void. It is a vessel. It is not a punishment. It is preparation. It is the rare moment in your life when the entire reservoir of psychic energy is in your hands alone. The question is no longer, why am I alone? The question is, what will I do with this fire? Because if you squander it, you repeat the cycle of dependency. But if you contain it, concentrate it, and transmute it, your singlehood becomes the birthplace of sovereignty. And this brings us to the final step, your commission. To name your archetype, to choose your path, and to act not just for yourself, but for the cultural medicine our age so desperately needs. The danger isn't that you see too much in your solitude. The danger isn't that you feel too deeply or carry too much unspent desire. The danger is only this: failing to build a conscious relationship with that ability. Because solitude is not a curse, it is initiation. It places the fire of libido back into your hands and demands, will you waste it or will you wield it? Integration begins when you stop calling yourself incomplete. When you recognize that you are not waiting to be chosen, you are choosing what to do with your energy. When you see that being single is not absence, but abundance, not exile, but laboratory. Use it as cultural medicine. Use it as constructive leverage. Show that an individuated self radiates more power, more creativity, more love than one who clings in desperation. So here is your task. Identify your archetype. Are you the wounded hermit collapsing inward, the distracted wanderer leaking everywhere, or the alchemist forging libido into gold? Claim it honestly. Share it. Begin the work of containment today. Because the world does not need more half-selves searching for completion. It needs whole individuals who have faced their solitude and emerged sovereign. This is your commission. Hold your fire, forge your gold, and become part of what's next.